Hello, wise humans. This is Cynthia Sue Larson with realityshifters.com talking with you today about being reborn as a new human by actively observing. And I'm going to start with a quote by Terence McKenna because when you get into active observation, you can start noticing reality's not what most people think it is if they're in a materialistic paradigm. And that's what all they think is matter's all that matters, and so on and so forth. Everything can be objectively observed, yada, yada, yada. Well, Terence McKenna famously said, I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder until, finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. And I think we're getting to that point. There's an ontological shock occurring. I got to talk about that a little bit with a college class where I was a guest lecturer this semester. We're now in July, going into August 2025, and these were brilliant students, part of the Governor's Scholar Program in Kentucky. They had some excellent insights, questions, and observations. Most of them, when I asked for a show of hands, the majority of the students in the class definitely indicated they had experienced the Mandela effect. Also, when I asked how many of you believe it can be attributed to misremembering, another sizable proportion of the class, like 15 or 16 of the 18 hands I could see, were raised at that question as well. So then I asked a follow-up question, how many of the students would raise their hands to say that they believe that's the primary, misremembering is the primary factor to consider with regard to the Mandela effect. In other words, the primary causal agent. And at that question, only 1/3 of the class, maybe 5 students or so, maybe 6, raised their hands. And so when I look at that, and that was a fun class to teach, I was really excited to see that the students had my book as their textbook. They had hundreds, if not thousands, of other sources for this Mandela effect class. And I'm glad they're studying it. I'm glad such high-level scholars are studying the topic, because even if they do believe right now that this is a phenomenon attributable to misremembering, as I pointed out in the guest lecture, this phenomenon, it's hard to prove it for sure to non-experiencers, but once you've experienced it and you start looking more closely and you continue to experience it, such as witnessing what's called a flip-flop. In other words, you're in one timeline where facts are a certain way, then you're in a different one, clearly, and then you go back, maybe back and forth a few times, as I've done. That can be very convincing because it indicates that by paying more attention, you're noticing this is not going away. In fact, it's getting more pronounced. And so it's very interesting. Basically, this ontological shift that I'm thinking about might have to do with UFO sightings. It's anything that challenges our viewpoint that only the material world and sort of a standpoint of the assumption of objectivity is premier. And so anything that topples those assumptions, which quantum physics actually has been doing for, I think, over 100 years, but for people that aren't studying quantum physics that closely, they may not be aware of that. So the Mandela effect itself is something that, to me, indicates we definitely are living in what you might call a simulation. I prefer to call it a dream. I'm going to show an illustration. This is the front and back cover illustration artwork from my book, Quantum Jumps. And when you're looking at that artwork, originally I had an explanation in Quantum Jumps explaining what that was about. There was a Mandela effect that occurred with that book, and it did not make it into that book. It's completely missing. So I did include it in my Mandela effect book to explain basically what's pictured here is a decision point where there's basically a mechanism where the many worlds of the quantum multiverse can be one and the same as the cosmological multiverse. So you can actually say the Hugh Everett III kind of concept of the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics is absolutely one and the same as saying that there were many possible big bangs, for example. And so how does that work? Basically, it's through basically a microscopic wormhole, and that's an Epstein-Rosen wormhole bridge pictured there, where one person's decision kind of catapults them into another reality. In truth, it doesn't feel or look quite like that. Usually when I make quantum jumps, it's something that seems seamless. Like like someone edited the movie of my life, and they did such a beautiful, spotless job that aside from small changes, everything looks pretty much the same. So if you think about what it means to live in a simulation or a dream, we start looking at the fact that consciousness is involved, observation is involved, and we'll be getting into that today as I talk a bit more about that in just a minute. But basically, I want to also consider the fact that we can look at an optimal future from the standpoint of ancient prophecy. I sometimes talk about the Hopi prophecy, as I wrote about in an article for Parabola magazine called Comes True, Being Hoped For. And in that article, I talked about how we're in what the Hopi consider to be the fourth world. Personally, I sort of sense that that's heart consciousness that we're mastering. And then the Hopi say we're going into the fifth world, and that it's a growth process. The world has ended 3 times before. It'll probably end a 4th time with the fourth world, when we start to see the signs of extinct animals and plants and life forms coming back, which we do, and I cover that in my book, The Mandela Effect and Its Society. But this also gets into an idea from the chaos theory, and I wrote a paper about that too a while back, about quantum theory and chaos theory having many points of commonality. I'm not going to get into all the specifics here, but if you want to look it up, you can, and it's on my website, realityshifters.com. These papers are there. Basically, the similarity comes from the observation that Daniel Schmeckenberger made. He said that at this time, he's looking at artificial intelligence, society, and hoping to find an optimal path forward for humans. I'd like to see that too. How good can it get? But when he's doing that, he notices that there's kind of this dystopian, autocratic, over-controlled option, which some people might think is great, but if you're not on the side of whoever's making those rules, it's not so great. And then on the other side is kind of anarchy and chaos. And Daniel Schmeckenberger says that there can be a third attractor. That's a chaotic, strange attractor. So what does that look like? He says some things, that it would be sustainable, regenerative, and beautiful. And to me, that ties in with what I like to look at when I talk about an alternative to transhumanism, which I call revhumanism, but I'm borrowing heavily from the Hopi. Here's their Hopi prophecy rock. It's a sort of a rubbing of what's drawn on the rock. And basically the creator is there showing humanity that at this point of the paths going 2 different ways, humans can go, that upper path is a line of, looks like the people are kind of losing their heads. Greg Braden goes into detail, and he talks about how the Hopi elders showed him that detail on the rock itself. And the lower line continues on around the face of the stone, keeps going to the fifth world. That's the path where humans follow the Creator's advice to maintain relationships and connections to plants, animals, each other, the earth. And so that's, to me, what revhumanism is all about. It's a philosophy of harmoniously living and co-creating with a living, developing cosmos where nature is our friend, and reverence is for the earth is premier. Also, reverence for other beings. And then the reason for the word rev, it has Latin roots, and I like those. They relate to ideas of reviving, regaining, recalling, and growing strong and young again. And it's really that regenerative feeling that we get from nature with the cycles and springtime following the winter and all that good stuff. So it's an invitation to live true to our highest potential. What does it look like? We find out as we go. We are challenged to be the wise humans, the Homo sapiens that we've been named, to live up to that. And so this is more wisdom than cleverness, more hope than cynicism, more humility than hubris, more empathy than apathy, and more reverence than insolence. And those are the qualities that I would look for when I know that we're on the right path. So what is this birth of the new human inside of the weirdness? And when we're looking at the weirdness, I told you there's some strange stuff going on with UFOs and sightings and all this stuff, artificial intelligence, just the nature of reality. It seems like every day there's some new scientific discovery. So with all of this happening, we can also look at the fact that we don't have to look outside of ourselves to find these miracles. A lot of them are inside of ourselves as well. And one thing I mention in my book, The Mandela Effect and Its Society, I cite some excellent scientific research proving that it's possible in one generation for an entire species to evolve. And that may sound outrageous, like how could that happen? But it has happened, it does happen. And this is the work of John Forster Cairns. He suggested organisms themselves. He was looking at Escherichia coli bacteria in experiments, and basically they were putting these little petri dishes of, usually it would have nutrient agar. I did these experiments in biology class in high school, not this one, but similar. And so they took Escherichia coli, which is pretty hardy stuff, but they gave it an agar dish that was, these were lactose intolerant Escherichia coli, and with the food that they could not eat, that's all they were given on the little petri dish they were placed on. So what happened? Well, what happened was amazing. I'm just going to read a quote. Basically, they evolved. So the quote says, the cell could produce a highly variable set of mRNA molecules and then reverse transcribe the one that made the best protein. It's as if these little bacteria were able to look to the future like a quantum programmer would, quantum computer might, to look at all the possible timelines that are out there and choose the best one. And what I get so excited about this. What this means for us is that all of the crises that we are personally and together collaboratively facing, all of that is an invitation to us. An invitation for what, you might wonder. Okay, well, on the cover of my book, which I just showed you, here's this artwork. These are 2 Wigner bubbles named after Eugene Wigner. The term Wigner bubble, that's not Eugene's name. That's Eric Cavalcanti, the physicist, who wrote an award-winning paper about this topic. Basically, it's saying that we can actually experience a unique subjective reality. And that's been proven to be true in a scientific experiment with the double slit experiment and 6 entangled photons, published in 2019. It was really amazing, cutting-edge work. But combined with the theoretical physics of Eric Cavalcanti and his team, like I said, they won an award for that paper. It's possible to see that we can live in basically a subjective reality. So what does that mean? I'll get into that in just a second. But it means that we can start paying attention to what level are we vibrating at. And I know that sounds woo-woo, may sound new age, but the truth is, if you're vibrating at a very low level on the map of consciousness, that's on that David Hawkins scale, you can look it up, Hawkins map of consciousness. Down at the bottom are things like feeling angry and bitter and resentful. And you can imagine, it's been my experience, when I feel those feelings, I'm human, I get those feelings. But if I'm manifesting from there, that's when things go wrong. If I go a little to the mid-range on the Hawkins scale map of consciousness and I get into, feeling peaceful and love and so forth, it's getting a lot better, and I'm definitely manifesting a lot better. If I can ramp it up and get to like his 500 or 600 or 700 level, up to reverence and grace and just bliss, that sense of being one with the cosmos, that's when I've seen the most out of this world, almost unbelievable. It challenges me to believe that this just happened, like a flat tire on my car being instantly repaired when I know it was flat and was pulling to the right. And I describe that in my book too. I've talked about it on other videos. But anyway, if we keep this in mind, like our mindset matters, then we can start paying attention to what's the low point today, what's my high point today, what's the average, how am I doing right now? And just not judging yourself, just noticing. Am I bitter and angry? Or am I feeling kind of relaxed and mellow and joyful? Or am I just blissed out? Where am I today? And you can actually start to notice how you can exert influence through your observations. Here's an illustration I'm going to show you from the book, The Mandela Effect in Its Society. And I've just printed it here. That's 2 scientists pointing at each other. One is observing the other one. The first observer is looking inside Schrodinger's cat box. He's noticing the cat looks like it is dead. And that's the first observer. But then we can imagine that's Schrodinger himself, perhaps looking in the box. Cat's dead. He opened it. The little mechanism released the toxic poison based on the random activity of the Geiger counter hooked up to the radioactive isotope. Anyway, Eugene Wigner, we'll call him the other scientist, he's observing Schrodinger, and he sees that Schrodinger is in a superposition of states. He can sort of see like, 2 options are still possible. I'm voting with my happy, good vibes that this cat is alive. And he can actually witness that. And that's basically what was seen in the experiment conducted in 2019. And that's the power of these Wigner bubbles. And that's why they matter so much that I put it on the cover of this book, because that's the key to working with all of the natural quantum superpowers that we all possess. So we can thus raise our vibe and start experiencing some of these wonderful things. And I've got a chart of some of these superpowers in the book. It's too small to read, but you can kind of get a glimpse of it. And basically, when you consciously agree to grow above the old patterns that might have been holding you down and into that bitterness and resentfulness, and you start feeling good, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps because maybe nobody else will, then you can start seeing some amazing things. You can travel farther in less time than seems possible. I get so many reports about that, first-hand reports on the Reality Shifters website. You can get future memory input so that you can guide yourself forward in the best possible way, to your best possible future self. You can also assist yourself and others in healing. You can also get deja vu. You can basically choose those optimal realities when you see the superposition of states and a couple things are happening in real time. You can keep asking, how good can it get? And start steering things that direction, even if you feel like you're not good at this yet. So that's it in a nutshell about how you can be a future human right now, just by actively observing and bringing a new quality of high level, high vibratory state, active observation, recognizing that when you do that, you can actually outvote someone who's in a lower state of mind, so that you can witness in your subjective reality really excellent outcomes for all of us. And the more of us keep asking, how good can it get? Together, I know we're going to find out. And I think I've mentioned before, if you want to join me in person, I'm doing one event this year. It's Crestone, Colorado. You can find it on the events page on realityshifters.com. And it's also on the Starworks USA website. I'll be with Paola Harris. She's been doing amazing work with the Buga sphere in Mexico. And she's a top-notch UFO researcher from Italy, and she's also an experiencer. And then our third presenter is Julian Chameroy. He's just coming out with his book on oneness this year in English. It's been out in Japanese, and he'll be talking about his experiences, and he'll be talking about consciousness and this experience of how we can move forward together collectively to be the best that humanity's ever been. So until next time, please keep asking my favorite question, how good can it get? I love you so very, very much. Take care.